Father, in the name of Jesus, I just thank you to be here this morning. And Father, I just pray that the words I speak, they would come from you. Now, Father, if you don't come, your Spirit doesn't fill this place, then our worship will be in vain. But Father, you said where two or more are gathered in thy name, and we are gathered in the name of Jesus right now, that you would be in the midst. Your Son's presence would be with us. And so we thank you and welcome you this morning and ask that this worship service would bring a smile to your face and joy to heaven. In Jesus' name, amen. Well, I was raised an Adventist, 5 generations. Some people say you didn't even know you had to go to church. That's a ticket right into heaven, right? 5th generation Adventist, well, man, that's guaranteed, right? Nothing to it. You just, bam, you're born, you're in. But I grew up, and I not only was I 5th generation on one side, I was 4th on the other. So Adventism was what I knew as a young child. But at the young age of 2 years old, my father was studying to be a physician's assistant, and he went to a school in West Virginia, in Philippi, where they actually, believe it or not, had a good PA program. You say, well, how can that be in West Virginia? Because I've lived there, I can say those things. But anyways, no, it was really a fantastic school, and so I went back there, and so 2 years old, my life kind of I remember the night we got there. I can still remember it to this day as a little kid, and I can even remember the shoes my dad was wearing, and things were fun and great and everything, and I was having a great life. And about the time my father graduated from college, he got his first job in a little tiny town in West Virginia called Brewston Mills. Is anybody? I know you blink. You don't even have to blink. Just think about blinking, miss the whole place. So we moved to Brewston Mills, and they don't pay a lot back then. Even for a PA, he didn't make very much. And then you put him in West Virginia, that's even less back there in the mountains. And so we were living in a trailer park back there, didn't have very much. And so it was my dad's first real job as a PA, and things were going nice. I remember a new school. It was interesting. It wasn't very large, little tiny place. But life wasn't bad. And things were going along pretty well. And then one day I remember that we hadn't been there but a few months probably. And my father, he had been taking me. I would go with him sometimes, and we'd go over and to some friends' his house, and she had a little girl that was my age, and I really enjoyed playing with her, and we had a good time. And then one day out of nowhere, my grandma shows up to my house there. And some arguing's going on, and things are happening in the house, and I wasn't really sure what was happening. And so I was out playing with the kids in the trailer park there, and the local kids around there, and we were having a good time. And all of a sudden they started to talk, and they began to tell me some things that I didn't know what was going on in my own family. And I remember they started to make fun, and they were laughing at me because my parents were getting ready to get a divorce. And nobody had even told me. And I remember my grandma, she came and she was pleading with my father, don't do this. Don't do this thing. And my mother, she was willing to forgive, even though my father was doing these things, because what I didn't know, that this little girl I was playing with, that my father was having an affair with her mother at that time. And no matter how hard my mother and my grandmother pleaded, which was my father's mother, nothing they could say was going to change his mind. And like that, one night, my mom, she swooped me up, and we went to Philippi, West Virginia, back there to a friend of hers house, and I grew up there the next several years, a few years of my life, and like that, my life was changed. And as a young kid, I liked to play sports a lot, and now my dad wasn't going to be around very much for my games, but my mom was always faithful. She always went. But as a little boy, you kind of, I wish Dad was there more often. But I would go and see my dad on the weekend. He moved to Morgantown, and Dad was faithful. He would come get me on the weekends, and I'd go with him. And after a while of seeing Dad, I realized, you know what? Hey, Dad's actually a lot of fun. I actually like coming to see Dad, because Dad would go on the weekends and we'd go up to Big Bear Lake, and they'd have dances and parties up there. And as a little kid, I would get to go along with Dad, and I can remember they would let me drink wine and go to these dances, and it was, I was doing everything the adults were doing and having a good time. And I can remember as a little kid, I can remember the first time I got to touch moonshine to my tongue as a little kid up there in West Virginia. I can remember how bad it burned. But I was like, man, this is wild. And my step-granddad, he'd get so drunk at night, I'd have to go out, and me and my stepsister, we'd have to walk him back home. And it was just so much fun. We were enjoying ourselves because we were like, hey, man, we're having a good time. And we're doing things we knew little kids shouldn't be doing. And Dad was a blast. I was loving it. And so I would continue. I got to where I'd like to see Dad. And I wish he was there to be there around my sports games. But hey, if I could go see Dad on the weekend, I was going to go. And so it was a lot of fun and everything. And we were doing all kinds of stuff. And they were drinking beer and partying. And it was just a blast. And then all of a sudden, out of nowhere, I went to Dad's. And if you went into Dad's and you opened up the bottom drawer on the refrigerator, you were guaranteed to find some beer there. And so we went there and you open up the bottom drawer and the beer was gone one weekend. And we weren't going up to the dance anymore. And I'm like, what happened to Dad? And next thing I know, now he's taking me to church. See, someone got the bright idea to share some Morris Venden tapes with my father, right? Of a prayer meeting back at Southern Missionary College back in the day. And my father, out of nowhere, without telling anybody, got converted and gave his heart to the Lord. And so here my stepsister and myself, we're like, what's going on? We don't like this anymore. We're not enjoying this anymore. And now Dad's wanting to go to church and he's happy all the time and this playing songs is like, hey, wait a second. This is not what we signed up for. And so quickly, Dad wasn't as much fun to hang around with anymore. Well, it continued on, and as the years grew more, I wanted to go see Dad less and less when I could. Because I had friends around where I lived, and they were good buddies, and they liked to have a good time. And so going to see Dad, I knew it was going to be a bunch of church stuff, and who in the world wanted to go do that? And Dad didn't like my music, and he didn't like this, and he didn't like that, and I couldn't do this and that on the Sabbath. I was like, man, what's your problem? So I decided I wasn't going to go see Dad as much. And I would try to get out. I had to go, so I did, but I didn't want to go. And as the years kept going on more and more, my mother was blessed to meet a wonderful man who really stepped in at a young age and really taught me how to be a man. Now, he's still to this day, he's not a converted man, but I'm praying that it will happen one day. But he stepped in and he taught me how to be a man. And my mom got married, and we moved over to outside of Harrisonburg, Virginia in 1985. It was the summer between 5th and 6th grade. Another new life. My life once again was being changed around. And I'll never forget, I didn't want to come at all, but I came. Obviously, I had no choice. And it was a new world of something different, and it was kind of exciting, yet scary at the same time. But it didn't take long for me being here till I found where my good new friends were at. You know what I mean? Do you know troublemakers can always find other troublemakers? It's like a magnet. Wherever we go, we can find them. And so from a young age, here I am between 5th and 6th grade. By the time I'm in the 6th grade year, I'm already meeting other friends. Now see, my mother, because she had to leave, she went back with her best friend. My mom's best friend back there was a basketball coach at this little college back in Philippi. And we would travel around from even a young age with the basketball coach. Now, because remember, my parents were divorced in kindergarten. So from a young age, I was traveling with the basketball team. And so on top of my already drinking and partying and doing those things from a young age and having a good time, now I was riding around with the basketball team and I was seeing women all the time in things I shouldn't be seeing them in. So now on top of all that, by the time I was 10 years old, I was getting involved in things that not a 10-year-old should even know exists. And my mind became extremely perverted. And now, not only was I having fun doing these other things, now I had a different look on women. And that was my life from a young kid. So I continued on and continued on. And I remember about the time 8th grade came around, my grades were getting pretty bad and things were going wrong. And I knew that, Frank, you're not going the best path right now. Something needs to change in your life. So I had a great idea. You ever had a good idea how you could get yourself fixed? You just knew that if you could do this, this, and this, that your life would change. You ever had one of those ideas? I know I'm not the only person. How did that work out for you? Did anybody actually have success? Because I tried and it didn't work out real well. But I decided that in ninth grade, ninth grade was coming up, I said, you know what? I'm going to go to SVA. Now, I went up there at SVA and seen it, and the girls were pretty, and it looked like it would be a good thing for me. And I thought, this would get me straightened out in life. I'll just go to SVA, and they'll get me right on the track. I didn't realize that was actually SVA's worst year almost in their history. I may have contributed to that. And so I decided, I went to SVA and I was having a good time, and I met some new friends, and as I met these new friends, they wanted to have a good time too, and I saw some people that I knew from West Virginia at camp meeting back there going with my dad, and they were heathens, and they lived right across the street, and they had their own place, and so I found out that at night we could just sneak out over to their house and have a real good time. And I'd get thrown out of religion class all the time, and I would get in trouble because I wouldn't wear the right clothes. But I was having fun, and it was there in ninth grade that was for the first time I tried marijuana in my life. And I remember, whoa, man, this is some great stuff. And so here I was, a ninth grader, a complete mess. And the idea I thought that was going to get me straightened out, I just kept going down and down and down. By the end of that ninth grade year, they had thrown so many kids out, it was over with. And I did make it through. How? I don't know. But making it through, I went back and I decided, you know what, I'm going to go to public school. And oddly enough, nobody from SVA called me and begged me back. I don't know what was up with that. But anyways, I guess, they just forgot my number or something. But anyways, so I went back to public school. And when I got back to public school, and I found all my friends, you know what I mean? I was excited, and I was there again, and it was on now. I was in 10th grade, I was getting my driver's license, and life was just starting. Now I had the freedom to go do whatever I wanted. I wasn't getting caught taking the car anymore. I could actually legally drive it. I used to borrow it once in a while when my parents, I was just test driving it, that's all. But anyways, now I legally could drive around, and so I had the car, and I was having a good time, and now this pot went from smoking it once in a while and from drinking here and there to an everyday occurrence to where I began to get high every morning before I'd go to school, and as soon as I would get out. And now I'd tried some new drugs called LSD, and man, they were fun. And my life continued to get worse and worse. But I had another problem on top of that. I was angry a little bit. And I had a violent streak about me. And I had an ego the size of Texas. And I used to think, because growing up out in the country boys like to fight a lot. You can take two of the best brothers. They'll fight each other to death. You go in and mess with them, they'll turn and beat you up and then go back to fighting each other. It's all they know to do because they don't have anything else to do in the country. So they just do that. And so my life went from now getting into fights all the time to drinking and to smoking dope into a complete mess to where I became so enamored with my partying that I began to lose touch with reality. So now, 10th grade was over. I wrestled for my last time because I was no longer eligible to play sports anymore. I barely was passing school. This continued and got worse and worse and worse until my senior year came along. And I decided, you know what? Frank, you're getting close to graduation. You're kind of a mess, okay? You need to do something in life. And so, bam, I had a great idea again, man. This one was foolproof. I had an idea that was so guaranteed to make a change that if I did this, I'm for sure my life would be better. And I decided the only way, Frank, you're going to get straightened out if you join the Marine Corps. And I decided I'm going to go join the Marines. I had a family history of military on one side particularly. It was very rich military all the way back. My grandfather cleaned out Hitler's ovens in World War II. Very rich family history of military. And so to go in the Marine Corps was a big prideful thing for me. And it was a chance to make a change in life. And I'll never forget, I had talked to some friends and they had went through, and my friend told me, he said, look, if you do everything I tell you to do, you'll get promoted, okay? And I said, all right, I'll do that. And so I had about a 6-month period from the time I graduated till the time I went in the boot camp. And I remembered I partied myself to death. I stayed high, drunk for that probably, I don't know if I was straight, hardly, maybe only in my sleep was I straight. And I partied myself all the way up till the end point, but I decided at that moment, I said, Frank, you're going to give this a shot. And so I'd listened to everything my friend had told me, and I did everything he said to do. And when I went into boot camp, I tried harder than I tried with everything. I had the highest physical fitness scores, which this camera will not reflect that, okay? But that was back then. I've got pictures. There was a different time. People are like, oh, all right, anyway. But I was in shape, and I was doing good, and I graduated, and I got promoted, and I went in a private. I came out of boot camp, a private first class. I'd been meritoriously promoted, and everything was going great, and I was in the shape of my life, and I was on top of the world, and my mom and everybody was so proud. Maybe just now their son had made a change in life. And so I remember I'd just gotten leave, and I got to go home for 10 days, and I couldn't wait to show off what kind of condition I was in. Went out to the first party that night, hadn't seen all my friends, and ended up getting high. Started smoking dope again. I went to Marine Corps combat training, went through my training, did a good job, kept on continuing on, and my first assignment after I was through my training in 29 Palms was overseas. And I remember we got overseas to Okinawa, Japan. And one thing about Okinawa was that they didn't have the drug problem like they do here in the U.S. There's not as big of availability. But we found out because, a true drug addict can get high anywhere. Did you know that? I don't care what, they will get high somehow. And we found that in their grocery store, they're not their grocery store, their pharmacies, they had cough syrup with opium in it. And so, man, we would get this cough syrup and we'd drink it all down, and we'd stay high on opium through the whole weekend and drink more beer than you can imagine. And that was my life all the time. And it was constantly, and I'd figured out how to get high even when there wasn't a drug availability. Very much drugs available over there. And so life was going pretty good. And because in Okinawa they didn't test for drugs because there wasn't very much available. I got back to California, and they sent me back to Camp Pendleton. And when I got back to Camp Pendleton, I was kind of excited because I came to a unit where I had some friends from overseas at, and it was kind of exciting. And I never forget I'd been there a couple weeks, and a friend of mine said, "Hey man, there's a concert. We're all going to it down by San Diego. Let's go." I said, "Hey man, I'm there." And so I'll never forget, we got there at the concert, and everybody's having a good time, right? And I'm at the concert, someone starts passing some pot around, and I saw it coming, and I wanted to make sure it was safe for everybody else. So I tried it. It was okay, and I passed it on down there, and I was having a good time, and I knew everybody was going to be all right. And so I got back Monday morning, and they said, drug test. I didn't have time to drink 5 gallons of tea to try to flush my system out. It was now. I went in and I took that drug test, and I failed. Now, back in the 70s, 80s, I don't know about the 60s, probably too, but during the late 60s, early 70s, during the Vietnam era, all the way into the 80s, you could actually pop positive in the military and stay in for drugs. Those guys in Vietnam, I think they were just happy that they were staying there, and they didn't care. And in the 80s, they didn't really, you could pop, it would go on your record, but it wasn't a big hit. But when I went in the Marine Corps, they had a new rule. It's called zero tolerance. And that's what they meant, zero tolerance. And so if you pop positive for marijuana in the United States Marine Corps, you will get a general under other than honorable conditions discharge. Try getting a job. It's a little better than dishonorable, but it doesn't look good on your resume. And I was crushed. Because not only the humility of being thrown out, but the disgrace to my family of these war heroes that I had in my family. That I and my grandfather, who I would have to go back and say, "Hey, your grandson's nothing but a dopehead." And I was ashamed. They said, "Well, you can request an administrative separations board and plead your case, but it won't help." I said, "You know what? I'm going to request an administrative separations board." And so I request so I could go up and plead my case. So I remember I had maybe 6 months in between the time when I had popped positive till my administration board. And I remember I had to shine that brass in that battalion. I had to clean those toilets. And I did everything with all my heart. And I decided, you know what? While I'm waiting, I'm going to go out and get higher swim quals, get combat swimming qualified. I'm going to go do this. And I got handwritten letters, believe it or not, for things I had done. And I had all this stuff going on. And I tried with all of my heart. And I even came clean. I told my mom what had happened. And she called my uncle, who was really decorated. And he wrote some letters and did some things. And we tried to get it, do the best that I could do. And I remember at that moment, I started to get so desperate that all of a sudden it came back to my mind, hey, Frank, maybe you need God. And so I got excited. And I decided that I need to focus on the Lord. And so I talked to some guys in there. There were some Baptists, I remember, and some other guy, and they were showing me some things and getting me excited. And I called Dad. I said, hey, Dad, I need some help here. Can you send me some books? And Dad sent me, the Omega and all those things. I'm like, yeah, that's some good stuff. And I started to get a little bit excited about God because I was desperate and embarrassed because of the situation I was in. So here I was studying. I was starting to seek the Lord, and it came time for administrative separations. Now that day, I went in. My lieutenant came in, my company first sergeant, my sergeant, and many other people came in to testify. Matter of fact, my first sergeant took so much heat because he came in to testify on my behalf. And that day, they went in there, and I'll never forget, there was 3 men, and they were judging my case that day. And they were there, and the government sent in a man, and he didn't know anything about me. And he came in, and he was saying all kinds of bad things about me. And he didn't know anything. And it was a hard case coming against me of why they should throw me out of there. And we pled my case, and we brought in all the witnesses saying, give this guy a chance. And so as we did that, I'll never forget my lawyer at the very end. He looked over at me, and we were going to break while they made their final decision. He said, look, man, he says, I don't think I can get you to stay in the military, but I think I can get you a general discharge, which was a step up, which is just one step under honorable, which at least I'd be able to get a good working job. He said, but I don't think we can get you retained. He'd only heard of one case ever where the corporal had given someone under him the drugs, and for some reason they had punished him instead of the other guy. One case he had known of. That day we walked back in, and I will never forget, it was a captain, a major, and a gunnery sergeant on my board. And so here I am, I'm at the end, and I'm getting ready. My whole life is right in front of me. And I'll never forget, they looked over and they said, it's a 2-to-1 vote for retention. You're staying in the Marine Corps. And God saved me the humiliation of being thrown out. And you'd think, Frank, man, look what the miracle God just did for you. He just defied the odds of military law right in front of your face. You should be thankful. It didn't take but a month or two before I went right back to doing the same thing. But the difference was now, I was in the rodeo at this time. Believe it or not, crazy, isn't it? I was in the rodeo, and I realized that these cowboys that you see on TV that are riding those bulls and doing all those things, you think they're bright-eyed like that because of just adrenaline? Got another thing coming. There's probably more drugs in the rodeo circuit than anything you could ever imagine. And it was at that time that I had first met a new friend called crystal methamphetamines. And my life took another turn downhill. So now it wasn't just drugs and drinking, smoking pot and drinking beer. Now I'm snorting crystal methamphetamines, and I'm on top of the world. I'm wide open. And this drug was amazing because the way it made me feel, the way it gave me a confidence when I was talking to women, the way it made me do things. I mean, this stuff was incredible. And before I knew it, this stuff began to control my life to where every day of my life I was either high on speed, pot, and I remember I would snort something, get too high, I would smoke something, try to come down, I would be out of something to snort, so I would abuse medication to try to get back up. And every single day of my life, from the time I woke up to the time I went to bed, I was abusing some forms of drugs to where it became a balancing act to try to keep myself even keeled. One day I was at my first sergeant's house. Now, he didn't know that I was still so deeply into drugs, but he liked to drink all the time. So I went up there, and I would have to go take his motorcycle to him at the bar. His car. He'd be so drunk he couldn't ride his motorcycle. So I'd take his Mustang up to him, and I'd drive his motorcycle home so he could get home that night, or try to get home. And so I remember one night we went to a bar, and I saw this beautiful woman there. I mean, I'll never forget. She came walking by in front of me, and I was about to hit the floor. I said, wow. And she wasn't a drinker part. She just liked to come and dance to country music. And I remember I went over there and talked to her, and I eventually called her on the phone, and she decided she was going to go out. And I was so excited. Man, this was a real woman. I was excited. She was beautiful, everything you could imagine in life. But as I began to meet her and to know more about her, I found out something about this woman that was very disturbing. See, she had grown up in a family where her oldest brother was a drug addict. And she was abused by her own mother. But she was bound and determined not to turn out that way. And I used to laugh at her. I said, that's crazy. Nobody's had that kind of stuff happen to them in life, until I went over to her house and I found out it was all true. And the last thing this lady wanted to be with was a drug addict. Because at one point she had to hold a gun to her brother's head just to keep him away. And I told her, no, I'm not into that stuff. She had found some pot in one of my pants, but that was somebody else's. I was just holding it for him. See, it didn't belong to me. It always belonged to somebody else. My mom kind of laughs about that now. They weren't laughing then. That old story. Oh, we found this in your room. Oh, that's not mine. Somebody left it there. I don't know how. So I had lied my way out of it and convinced my girlfriend at the time that this was not mine and that I was not like that. And she was believing me. And so it got closer to the time to get out, and I was such a mess and everything. And I'll never forget, I really liked this woman, but I liked the party too. And I told her, I said, look, if you want to be with me, I said, I'm not staying in California. These people are crazy out here. I said, I'm going back to Virginia. They're not morally right out here, because I was morally correct at the time. And so that's what I thought about them. I was so messed up in my head. And so she decided that she was going to come with me. And we got married. And she is still my wife to this day. But you heard the story, didn't you, of rags to riches? Now see, even though my wife had suffered a lot of abuse from her own mother, and her family just kind of ignored it, like it didn't really happen, even though it did. My wife grew up with money in Huntington Beach, California. And now all of a sudden, I pick up her entire life and I bring her back to rural Virginia. And so instead of rags to riches, now she's riches to rags. And not only rags, but these are redneck rags. And they don't talk right and they don't act right. And my wife was literally in culture shock coming to here. And so you would think that, Frank, okay, you just brought this woman here. You need to comfort her and take care of her. But it didn't take long till I was with my old friends and my wife was sitting at home while I was out running after other women. And my wife spent the next 2 years of her life miserable, sitting at home, wishing her husband would come be with her. Well, it kept progressing worse and worse. And I remember there would be times in my life when I would be doing drugs. I'm like, Frank, you need to stop, okay? Your dad stopped, he partied, he quit. You've got to quit. And I would try to quit, and I would end up worse every time. I mean, if I had $1 for every dope head and alcoholic I've heard say this is the last bag, I'd have some money. And I've said it too. But I would always end up worse than before I started. And so here we're going along, 2 years. I'm completely out of control at this point. I am holding down a job, but I'm draining our bank account so bad that the bank was warned from my wife, if he comes, don't give him anything. And they were actually working with my wife to try to keep me out of the bank. And I put us into such financial debt. But the Lord's gracious that we're finally out of that to this day. But I was in such debt because of my drug abuse. And my wife was so afraid to write a check that she never knew whether she was going to get a bill paid or a bill to pay when she wrote that check. Well, my wife finally eventually got tired of it. I'm done. She'd had enough of me. Why would you stay? Your husband doesn't care. He's violent as can be. I never laid a hand on my wife because I knew better than to hit women. Now, I've at least had that good of a raising. But I was angry. And I had a hair temper. And if you set that temper off, I was going ballistic. And why would you want to stay with somebody like me? And she had called her brother and she had made some arrangements. But she was so embarrassed to go back because her mother kind of set her up. You're going to fail. She didn't want to fail. She wanted to show her mom that she could do it. But she was done. But something began to happen. She started actually, after being gone for a while, her mother began to get rational for some reason and started talking to her. And my wife began to have a relationship with her mother. It's the weirdest thing. And now my wife's, she knows being here is helping a relationship, but she's done with me. And so one day, out of nowhere, my wife gets news and says, hey, you're pregnant. You're going to have a baby. And I was like, okay, I don't care. That's fine with me. You want to have a child? Good, we'll have a child. So my wife, now she's like, oh my land, how'd I get pregnant? I'm living with the psycho. We're starting to have a relationship, and my wife's just confused of what's going on in her life. But one thing was for sure, she wanted to get away from me. And so I remember that as we got closer and closer to her pregnancy, and my wife had been making arrangements, that one day, before she could get it all together, my wife gets a phone call that you never want to receive. Quick, get on a plane now. Your mother's dying of cancer. You need to come. Her mother had had cancer but went into remission and didn't tell anybody who came back. And so here's my wife, 7 months along in pregnancy, gets the call that her mom's dying. And so we get her on a plane, she gets out there immediately, and she watches her mother die the most hideous death you could ever imagine. I don't know why they let them stay in there. It was horrible. And you would think at that moment that a little bit of common sense would come back and say, Frank, you need to go call and check on your wife. But instead of checking on my wife, I was running around with other women. And even though her mother died, I didn't even care at that moment. To where my wife had to call and track me down. So there's some things in life you can't take back. Thank God He can forgive. And so here my wife was at a crisis in her life, and she truly needed me to step up for just a minute and tell her it was going to be okay. And instead I was chasing other women, getting high, doing what I wanted to do, and I didn't even care that her mother passed away. And she was done. She came back, she was getting her stuff, and she was out of there. She got news from the doctor that she wasn't actually going to go anywhere. She broke out because she was under so much stress. My wife broke out in a rash all over her body. The dangers to my child now, I was so foolish that what I was putting the stress my wife through, that she could have lost our baby. And so here the doctor says, you must go on to bed rest right now. And my wife was so upset, and she's like, fine, I'll have this baby, and then I'm gone. My wife, she made it through, and I'll never forget when finally the day came. We went into labor, and we had their daughter, and I remember that experience. I remember nobody had told me what they looked like when they come out, and that kind of scared me. But other than that, it was a beautiful, beautiful day, and it was exciting. And I was actually kind of happy. I have a child now. But there was a problem. Her dad was a drug addict. And so I remember being at the hospital, I'd have to slip out every few minutes and keep continuing to get high. So I could keep this buzz going because I could not come down. If I came down, I would be upset and angry. And I remember we went home, and here I have this little child, and you're holding it, and you're having to get up at night and everything, and I'm a mess. And I start looking at her, and I start thinking, man, Frank, your daughter's going to grow up and know that her father is nothing but an old dopehead. Man, that hit me hard. I didn't want her to know that I was a drug addict. I was so embarrassed. But the problem was I had kept trying to quit, and I just kept getting worse and worse until I was completely under Satan's control. And no matter how bad I wanted to stop, I couldn't. And it was tearing me up. And my wife, after the pregnancy, of course, she took some while for her to recover after this, and because of the condition and everything she had gotten into. And I remember that as I'm going there and I'm holding this baby, I remember this training that kicked in as a little child. So you think sometimes the things you tell your children, they don't sink in? They're there, trust me. And I remember that, Frank, even though you're not following the Lord, you need to take your little girl to church so that she can know who Jesus is. And I decided no matter what condition I was in, I was going to go to church for her sake so that she could know who the Lord was. And so I caught her and we went to church, and I would get high before and after, and I was still a mess, but I was taking her to church. And I'll never forget a guy one day, he says, "Hey man, I need your help." I'd known this guy for years from church and everything growing up. And he said, man, there's a country, it was like Honduras or something. They were hit by a hurricane and they were wiped out, man. They need some help. Can you come help us load some supplies? And I said, yeah, that's fine. I said, I can help you load some supplies. So we went up there that day and we loaded some supplies up. And as we were coming home, we started to talk about God that day. And my friend Jim was talking to me, and we were talking about different things. And I said to him, look, Jim, I said, let me tell you something. I know enough about the Bible to know that a man can't live the way I'm living and expect to be justified. And Jim said, hey, you need to read this book. When he had been down in South America somewhere, I can't remember where it was actually, he had met a man who was a Jew. You know, Adventists and Messianic Jews have a lot in common. Did you know that? And this man had given him a Bible study that blew his mind, and he'd given him a book he had written. And I started to read this book, and it was a real thick book, and there was a problem, though. As I began to read it, it was full of so much of the Bible. And I had an issue with reading. I wasn't very good at it at the time because I had barely made it out of high school. I say jokingly now, I graduated literally second or third in my class from the bottom. Now, my wife will testify. She saw my report cards. You have never seen more fantastics and dynamites in your life. That's why I used to classify them. And so here I barely made it out, and I'm trying to read this book, and it's filled with the Bible, and I'm struggling, but something's beginning to happen as I read this book. I noticed I couldn't put it down. And it was about the day and the age we live in. And as I kept reading this book, my sins started coming up into my face, and I began to see myself for who I truly was. See, I had kind of deceived myself when I was younger in life. I said, Frank, you can get right with God later in life. Maybe a thief on the cross, deathbed confession. You know, get it right there at the end and you can just slide right into heaven, right? And so I thought, Frank, you don't hate God. You'll be all right. You can get right later. And as I began to read this book, I started to see how hideous I truly was. And now, instead of coming home late just because I was getting high and doing drugs, I'm coming home late because I'm sitting on the backside of Mo Hill down there. I'm reading this book. I'm still getting high, but I'm reading this book and I can't put it down, and something's starting to change in my heart and I don't know what's going on. And I start to see myself and I began to hate who I was looking at. And I'll never forget, as I'm reading this book, that one day, through all this deception I'd put on my mind, that God finally broke through. And He said, Frank, you're going to die and you're going to hell. And I got scared. Because everything I had thought about, I'll get right later in life, God had just revealed to me, Frank, you are playing with fire right now. And if you were to die at this moment, your eternal destination will not be with me. And I got scared. And I didn't know what to do. And I'm driving down that road and I'm confused this day. I remember I'm coming home and I don't know what to do. Not only am I a drug addict and I'm trapped in what's going on, but God has revealed to me, Frank, you're going to die and you are going to hell. And I got scared and I didn't know what's up and I began to cry. And I was supposed to be this tough guy, and at that moment I began to break down and I was weeping before the Lord and I was crying hysterically in my vehicle that day because I was scared and I didn't know what to do. And I remember at that moment I began to cry out and I said, God, please. I said, if you will save my life, I'll give my life to you if you will just take these drugs from me. And at that moment I cried out. I met Jesus Christ for the first time in my life. I'll never forget when I cried at that moment that Jesus came down. I didn't see Him physically, but something took place in my work van, and I reached down and I grabbed all my drugs and I threw them out the window, and I'm just like, what just happened to me? Something just changed in my life, and I wasn't sure what happened, but I just cried out to God, and something just happened. And I drove home and my mind's all over the place because all of a sudden I just met the Lord and I don't know what's going on really, and I jump out of my vehicle and I run down into my house and I get in there and I open up the door and I tell my wife all the things that I've been doing. I said, honey, I'm a mess. I said, but I just gave my life to Jesus. And I said, are you going to leave me? Now I didn't know she was leaving. It was over. And at that moment, my wife, when she gets nervous, she likes to clean. So I make her mad the whole house clean. Just kidding, I wish she was here today. But she does get nervous and clean. She said, I'm going to go clean the bathroom. And I'm like, so I'm sitting there, I'm on the couch at my house, and my head is in a whirlwind. And I'm like, I've just dropped a nuclear bomb on my wife like she didn't know. Come on. And I had lied to my wife so often. Why is she going to believe me now? And I'm thinking, it's over. What am I going to do? I just got saved driving out. I didn't even know what salvation really was. But I knew that what just happened to me was so amazing. And now my wife's going to leave me? What am I going to do? And I remember a few minutes later, my wife comes out of the bathroom and she looks right at me, and I'll never forget. She said, it is finished. God had laid it on her heart in the bathroom. Your husband is done. It's over. She said, I'm not going anywhere. And God saved my marriage that day too. At that moment, I got on the phone and I called my dad. And I'll never forget this. I called my dad. And I said, Dad, today I gave my life to Jesus. And he began to cry. And I began to cry with him. And I said, Dad, it's like God told me. I have answered your father's prayers. I just knew that. He said, son, we have been getting together with other couples that have children. And we've been repenting for the sins we passed on to our kids. The Bible says, I'll pass the sins of the father on to the son and to the third and fourth generation of those who hate me. And I knew at that moment, God had answered my father's prayers. A few years ago, my daughter, she's 14 now. In this March, it'll be 15 years that I've been straight. It's upcoming March. And she wanted to get baptized.
And so I asked the pastor, I said, Pastor, could I be in the baptismal pool with her? He said, sure. And I'll never forget when he baptized her and he brought her up, and I grabbed her and held her. And I realized, man, why do I deserve this? Why did God show such mercy on me? And I realized that that day my father made those prayers that God broke the curse on the Cox family and showed mercy unto my children. See, it doesn't matter where you've been. It doesn't matter what you've done. It's at the moment that you will be honest with God and you will cry out to Him that He can make a difference in your life. And even though I had done things and I had sowed corruption and my daughter was born into corruption with the curse of the Cox family on her, the Lord broke it that day. And both my children love Jesus. What's keeping you from making a change in your life today? You think God's not able? I'm telling you, He's more than able. The only thing you got to do is be willing.